Welcome to Wheaton College's Center for Faith and Innovation podcast. The center's mission is to foster the integration of marketplace and ministry and to develop marketplace leaders. My name is Alec Hill, and I'll be your guest host today. I'm the former president of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship USA. Today's guest is Roger Parrott, and Roger has served as president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi for a whopping 27 years. Long time. Last year, Education Magazine recognized him as one of America's 10 most visionary education leaders. Leadership seems to run in his blood. Both his father and his grandfather were college presidents. His newest book is titled Opportunity Leadership, Stop Planning and Start Getting Results. It's fresh off the press. And the former president of World Vision, Rich Stearns, calls it an incredibly important book. So welcome, Roger. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's a treat to be with you on this. This is a really important platform, and I appreciate the invitation.
Well, Roger, we're old friends, but we won't dive into that. We'll just go into a question. So what's the big idea of the book?
Well, it's a pretty radical idea. People are telling me it doesn't seem radical to me because I've been doing it for so long, over 20 years. But the idea is that we need to let go of our long range planning and instead trust God for opportunities for where the Lord might lead us. And it's important to understand I'm talking about long range planning, not operational planning. So here at Belhaven, we plan very carefully for what we know we're going to do. We're going to teach English. We're going to run a dining commons. We're going to play football. We plan that very well, but we don't plan where God might take us. And so it really is a different approach to visionary planning. And I'm often asked, well, what's the future? What's Belhaven look like in 10 years from now? And prospective employees, faculty, or news people will ask me that. And my answer is, I don't know. But what I do know is the best plan we could come up with around conference tables is pale in comparison to the plan that God has for us. And so we don't do long-range planning. There is no plan for Belhaven 3030. It doesn't exist on our website. We've let it go. And in doing that, we've captured so much more than we ever would have done otherwise.
Okay, it is counterintuitive. And you use the metaphor of sailboats and motorboats. Unpack that, if you would.
Well, as I was trying to explain this and it was developing in my spirit and what we were doing to explain it to my campus, I needed to have a visual of some kind that we could all understand, because you can't just talk about the concept. People have to live this. And so it really was this idea of sailboats versus powerboats. They're both boats. They both go in the water. They both go a direction. But, you can get into a powerboat and call yourself a sailor and really not be much of one. But if you're in a sailboat, you better be a real sailor. And so they really come down to a lot of different characteristics that I kind of outline in the book. It's a complete difference in trust. Do you trust in the wind or do you trust in the motor? It's about a matter of control. Do you trust in your total control or do you trust in all the pieces working together and the direction of that wind? Your focus, if you're in a powerboat, you don't have to focus all that much. If you're in a sailboat, you got to be really attuned to the wind of God. Preparation. A sailboat takes a ton of preparation. Powerboat's a gas and go operation. The relationships in a sailboat versus a powerboat. But in the Christian world, we've gotten pretty good at building some very impressive powerboats that go where we think God wants us to go and completely ignores the wind. And so what I'm calling us to do is let's get out of our powerboats, because a poorly built, worn out sailboat will outdistance a powerboat every single time, because only a sailboat can catch the wind of God. And so that's the concept.
So you're not opposed to planning per se, right? Because you do operational planning. What you're opposed to is sort of predicting the future or planning and usurping God's territory. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's really letting go and trusting God for what that future may be. And it's the single best decision I've made in all these years of being a university president, because there are literally times I'll sit in my office at the beginning of a school year and I wonder, what are we going to do this year that's different? I really don't know. And then within weeks, the agenda is absolutely jam-packed. But, I think it's hard for us to do because we're expected to plan for a lot of different reasons, boards and donors and all kinds of things. People expect us to plan. There's an anticipation among the people we work with. If I'm a leader, I do that visionary planning. If I don't do that, where's my value added? But, in this concept, there really is no plan B. That is the plan. And it's interesting as I explain it and I say, we all trust God for the future. We all believe in God's sovereignty. We all want God's best. So let's just let go of our plan and let's see where he takes us. And people will say, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. And then they'll pull me aside and say, but if that doesn't work, what's the real plan? And my answer is there is no real plan. That's the plan. The plan is no plan. And because there's no plan B in this, and I have seen it work over and over and over again. It's pretty remarkable.
So, Roger, is there any middle ground here? I'm a strategic planning guy, so we're counterpoint here. And is there a place where if you go into a strategic planning process and you fast and you pray and you seek the Lord's face and what direction you want to send us? So, going back to the sailboat metaphor, you actually are trying to catch the sense of where the Holy Spirit will lead you, but you're trying to put that in paper. Do you reject that, or is there a place where the two ideas coalesce?
Well, I think they coalesce around understanding carefully our mission, our gifting, and our capacity. And if you look at those three characteristics of mission, gifting, and capacity, and you're very clear in what really drives you, the ministry in their mission, we don't budge because we stay in that mission. We know our gifting, we know what we can do, what we can't do, and we know what our capacity is. Then as opportunities come or as God's nudging comes, and the wind of God often blows very, very gently at the beginning. Often it's a phone call from somebody. Maybe it's a potential person we're hiring. Maybe it's a new relationship. Some opportunity begins to develop. And yeah, there's a responsiveness to that. Hey, that seems to line up with us. Let's look at that more carefully. And so, yeah, it moves into a thoughtful kind of evaluation, but it's also a very responsive moment that maybe that works and maybe it doesn't work. And part of our challenge is when we're doing strategic planning, we get our eyes set on what that objective is. And then when it doesn't work, we try to barrel through and make it work. Well, maybe God's not taking us there. And so in opportunity leadership, we're really letting go of that a lot more, keeping a pretty loose hand on it to say, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, God's no is as good as God's yes. But that's hard to do. It really is hard to do as a leader because we're trained so much to do it the other direction.
Now you've been a president a long time, and what would you say to young leaders who haven't had the time to mature in their sense of timing and being led by the Holy Spirit? Any danger for a first-time leader, or do you think this is exactly where they should start?
No, don't start here. You'll get fired. It'll happen. I just tried to write in the book kind of a synopsis of how jarring this is. And so I kind of wrote this fictitious scenario about a Fortune 500 CEO who goes for the annual meeting in New York, and how every year they go in with the plans and they introduce the plans and everybody applauds and all is excited. And they never measure up, and everybody kind of knows they never measure up, but they're excited that this year is going to be the year and whatever. And so this leader goes in and he goes up to the front of the mic at the big meeting, and he says, this year we're going to be different. I don't have a vision for you. I don't have a plan. I don't know if we're going to have more customers or fewer customers. I don't know if we're going to have different products or different markets or the same ones. But I do know what we're going to do is we're going to trust God for our future, and we're going to go where God takes us, and we're going to serve the best we can, and we know what God's given us, and we're going to get great results from that. And then I said in the scenario, within seconds of the first tweets leaving the room, the stock price goes in the tank, the senior leadership all quits, and the CEO is fired by the end of the day. And that's what will happen. So no, you can't just jump into this. So there is a process, there is a way to lead people into it because it is so different from what they expect of a leader. But there are ways in which that can happen, and you can help them to begin to capture it and to begin to embrace it. And the best way to do that is to look back. And every leader that I have talked to, and in the last chapter of the book, I bring in a number of leaders to kind of tell their stories of significant things that happened in their lives. And every one of them has said, you're right. The things that were most important to me, I didn't plan. They were God's opportunities, and I captured the moment. And I think over and over again. So as a new leader, look back over the last 3 years, 5 years, see what those opportunities have been, track them, write them down, and then begin to show that track record. And when you do, people will begin to embrace this, along with a lot of other things that can be done to bring that along.
So, Roger, about what year did you make this transition from the strategic planning to the opportunity?
2003.
So what year? So 27 years. What year was that in your leadership?
That would have been about year 8 into it. And I was a traditional planner before that. I'd had the blue ribbon committees. I'd appointed them. I'd made the big statements about the future, and we had the 5 points and the sub points under all that. And we had the glossy brochure with a picture of the person who's most against it in the brochure, because that's how to get by him. We'd done the whole thing and laid out that plan. And I just realized it doesn't work. Those things are limiting of what God can do.
So what epiphany did you have? Were you away on a retreat on a mountaintop? Did you wake up one morning? Did you take a bad shower? What was it that sort of the light bulb went off?
It was more traumatic than that. I was in trouble with the Accrediting Association. And I'd inherited a number of problems when it first came to Belhaven. Now, this would have been about 5 years before I made the shift. But this is the trigger that started. And I called Tom Kortz, who was president of Stanford University, and he happened to be chair of the accrediting council. And I said, Tom, I'm new to the South. I don't understand this accrediting region. Help me understand, because they've got a problem with our planning. And we had some big financial problems as well. And I said, could you give me an hour on the phone to help me? And he said, I'll do more than that. I'll come over and see you. And he came over and spent a day with us, brought his vice president for planning. And we spent a day together working. And he said at the end of that day, I'll never forget it, in front of his vice president for planning, he said, most everything important that's happened at my university, we never planned. They were just opportunities. And that was the trigger that started me on this journey to begin to let go of planning. Now, it took a while before I got the courage to do it.
Took 5 years. Yeah, 5 years.
Yeah, and then I had to kind of figure out how to do it. And that's why I wrote the book, because now we've had enough success in it that there is a roadmap for how to do it and to compress that time pretty dramatically. And people who are doing it are finding great joy in it. Again, there's a great release and freedom as a leader when you know God's got it for the future. It's not my deal to push it through. My responsibility is to be a good steward of what he gave me today.
So I'm going to make kind of a harsh statement here and see how you react to it. So do you believe that the traditional strategic planning represents a lack of faith, in which case it's not a matter of technique, it's really a matter of theology? Is that too strong?
It's probably stronger than what I'd want to go, because I think our faith is strong. I think there's an expectation that this is what leaders do. And we live under that expectation because that's the model we've been given. It's the model that boards expect. I mean, our boards come from businesses where they do plans and they project futures and they have quarterly reports. And so we live with that expectation. I don't think it's a matter of lack of faith, but I think it's never been given permission in this arena to really let go and trust God in the way that we preach. It's a lot easier to preach it than it is to do it. There's no question about it. But I think when we can get to the point of really trusting God for that future and really letting him have control of it, that's when we can just do so much more. And it's not a matter of one is bad and the other is good. It's a matter of one's okay and the other is so thrilling of what God will do. And I'll give you a quick example of that. We were into this probably a dozen years or so at the university. And I took into my board, and they were all bought in at this point that we didn't do long-range planning. And I took into my board a document, and I put it at their table, and it said 5-year plan. And the first goal was to increase the enrollment by 43%. And the second goal was to raise $21 million in gifts, which for us was a big chunk of money. The third goal was to build $31 million of new buildings. The fourth goal was 7 new undergraduate programs. The fifth goal was 8 new graduate programs. And the longer board members kind of figured out what I was doing as I was going through the list. And when I got to the end, I said, that's not a 5-year plan for the next 5 years. That's what we actually did the last 5 years. Now, the difference is if 5 years before I would have taken that in as a plan, first of all, they would have thought I was crazy and they wouldn't have trusted me as much. But more importantly, we would have cut that down by about 2/3 to what we knew we could do. And by not having a plan and trusting God, we were able to do so much more than what we'd done if we'd had a plan. And that's really the big concept behind it.
So is your approach a higher risk of mission drift or a lesser risk of mission drift?
Oh, I think it's a ultimately high commitment to mission. You've got to know your mission inside and out, and you've got to really be so engraced in your mission that you don't waver even when good opportunities come. And I get good opportunities to kind of go, as I write in the book about staying in your lane, to go outside of our lane, something that go in the same direction, traveling about like we do, looks a lot like we do, but you go outside that lane. And when you do, the mission begins to drift away from what our unique. And again, I come back to mission, gifting, and capacity. And if we get away from those three things, that's when this falls apart. So we've got to be more attuned to that than ever. And it's a lot more than mission statements. Mission statements is not it. In fact, I ask in the book 15 really hard questions about mission because we've got to so be convinced this is critical to the kingdom of God. And when we do, that's when I think God opens up these opportunities.
So opportunity is different from opportunistic, right? I mean, the one fear in somebody reading your book would say, well, they're just going to grab the next thing that comes along because they don't have a plan. But you're saying the mission is so deep in your DNA that you're able not to swing at certain pitches.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's knowing which ones fit, because when you go this direction, I think the thing that finally hits is that God will bring opportunities. I don't think most of us expect he will. I think we pray that he will, but we don't really expect it to happen. And when we know God will bring opportunities, what I find is we get a lot more opportunities than we could ever do. And so it's really figuring out which ones fit our mission, gifting, and capacity, and knowing that so well. And so I know, and so when I bring something to my board or to our faculty, it's kind of almost a no-brainer because we're all so in tune with what that mission is. We wouldn't even think of doing something outside of that. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a long time to develop.
Well, let me stick with baseball metaphors since I'm glad the strike is over and we're playing ball. You say that you encourage leaders to act like baseball managers, not like football coaches. Explain that.
Yeah, I wrote a chapter on that because this is a different style of leadership. And part of what we expect in leadership is kind of this model of an ideal football coach who's in charge of everything. And it's the Nick Saban, and I've been at his training camp, and nobody has a touch of water that he hasn't personally approved. I mean, it is so regimented, and that's our model of what a good leader should be. And I think it's the wrong model, especially for capturing opportunities. For a football coach, is all about control and preciseness and time constraints and team synchronization, that nobody's out of place at any time. It's about a predetermined plan. And football coaches are about winning every game. You don't do well in the SEC where I live in the South if you don't win every game. You're not going to be a good coach. You could,
8-3 won't cut it, will it?
Yeah, it won't cut it. You'll get fired at Georgia with that. And so that's football. Baseball, on the other hand, is about anticipation and being reactionary and encouraging personal ingenuity of each of those players and their unique gifts. It's about flexibility. It's about interwoven purposes. And it's about not winning all the time. Top baseball team loses 30% of their games. And
40% even, yeah.
or
Yeah.
40%, yeah. And so, it's I think we've gotten this football coach model in our mind, and in doing that, we're trying to keep this tight control that we're scared to death of making one mistake and having one loss on the record. And there's just a better way to lead than that. We don't need to do that.
Wow, that's good. You're right that leaders should get ahead of their ministries when opportunities present themselves. Use the term speed wins. Have you ever gotten ahead of your board or your VPs? And if so, what happened?
Yeah, I have. And I've learned pretty quickly to slow down. I've learned the hints of my board when they're uncomfortable, to slow down and make sure we're all on the same page. But speed does win, and part of the challenge of opportunities is people want to put them. An opportunity comes, so they want to put them through the regular evaluation process, and in doing so, by the time they get through the process, the opportunity's gone. They've missed it. And I had one a couple of weeks ago. It was a pretty major deal that we're doing with the number one rated university in China in a Doctor of Business Administration program. And they came about very quickly. We did it from start to finish, from when we first initiated the idea till we enrolled the first class in about 6 weeks. But the one of the issues was how many classes they could take at one time. And we wanted to put that through the process. And I said, no, let's just go ahead and commit. We'll get in and we'll get it worked out later on. Well, we got that worked out within that 6-week period. But if we had waited to work that out at the beginning, we never would have gotten started. So speed wins. You got to get in and then adjust as it goes along.
So your trustees trust you, and your VPs probably put their seatbelts on and go, "Here goes Roger again." I mean, that has to be both kind of exhilarating and kind of terrifying for both your bosses and your subordinates.
It's fun. We love it. And I've got a team who's very responsive to it, and they're all generalists because they do change their jobs at times, and it's not unusual for me to walk in and say, "Hey, how about if we got another project?" and something takes off. Or they come and say, "How about this? We got a project." But it's interesting. Again, I've been here 27 years. My board has never had a single split vote on any issue. We've never had a split vote. And part of that is waiting and listening to each other and trusting God for that future and trusting each other. And creating that culture within the board has been really positive because it allows us not only to start things, but it allows us to stop things at times too, which is really helpful.
All nonprofits have sort of cautious people who are risk adverse. Do you get rid of those people? I mean, you've got accountants and lawyers and risk managers. How do they cope with you?
Well, I always say every board needs 2 lawyers and 2 bankers. You don't want one of each, because if you have one of each, they become the expert and everybody refers to them. So you need 2 of each. But yeah, I appreciate my bankers and my lawyers because they are more cautious. And so they will think of things that I don't. And they do raise cautions about that. At the same time, they've got to trust and they've got to go faster than what their normal speed is. And it's something we've all learned together. It's not a, we do one weekend retreat and everybody's on board and we're ready to go. This has to be proven. And that's the thing about opportunity leadership. You can prove over time it works, and it works so much better than long range planning, but you got to show people. You can't just put it out as a theoretical idea and say, we're going to go do this. It scares people to death.
I think the other thing is, if you started this in year 8, so that's almost 20 years ago, you've built up a track record of trust, right? Yeah. So each decision gets easier because there's a basis and a foundation. But I imagine in those first couple of years, it felt a little quite uncertain.
It did feel uncertain. And so I think in those early years, you do smaller things. I didn't go to China in those early years. I didn't do some of the bolder things that we do now in those early years. They were smaller things, although we did start intercollegiate football. That was a pretty big one. But yeah, I think it's doing it with smaller things and celebrating both those opportunities that come and also the things that didn't work, to understand that God is using a preparation of what works and what doesn't work to get us ready for what He has next.
So let's talk about the process of spiritual discernment. So an opportunity comes, you go through the mission, sort of analysis and fiscal analysis. How do you fast? Do you pray? I mean, what do you do as a community to discern whether this is something you should take on or not?
You know, I think I'm not sure there's a specific model that we use. Obviously, we want to be very attentive to God's leading. I try to get everybody who would have insight on it around it. Now, we don't have a lot of structure because we don't have a planning model. You understand? So we bring in people who might have an insight on it, and then people who would be against it. I want to hear from the critics right up front before we ever make a decision on something, because you can learn something from them, no matter how sharp those things might be. But I'll give you an example. When we first went to China, which was 4 years ago now, I got a phone call on July 1 about this opportunity to start an MBA in China. And then I went and started talking to my team. We pulled, in the middle of summer, so we pulled in everybody on the campus who had some connection with China to get their insights and their perspective on it. I went and sat down with every member of my executive committee of the board of trustees for 2 hours each and explained it to them, got their questions, and then we put it all together. And that was July 1. August 1, we signed a contract. Again, the faculty as a whole, didn't even know about this yet. In August, had meetings
Oh,
with faculty, and and in that meeting, it was terrific because I said, vision in China is, we can't do what we do in America. We can't, disciple in a classroom because we're going to get kicked out of China if we do. So this is about planting, and we're going to trust God for the harvest over time and that kind of thing. And one of my faculty members who's married to someone from China said, that's so true, but in planting, somebody's got to go and cut down the trees first before anybody can even plant, and maybe that's our job. So we look at it in that perspective. But we first phone call July 1, signed the contract August 1, started writing curriculum September 1, and enrolled the first students October 1. And that kind of speed, and in that unanimous support from the faculty and from the board of trustees, because we had built a culture of open communication so everybody could participate if they wanted to, and we could take on a decision of that magnitude that quickly.
Roger, I spent 20 years in higher education. Universities are not known as being nimble. Okay. Matter of fact, when I left the university to go to InterVarsity, it was such a relief because this was a nimble organization. So the issues of faculty governance, the issue of stakeholders, having their veto power, what you just described in terms of a program, an international program, is astounding. I've never heard anything like it. And you didn't have a rebellion on campus.
No, and I give an example in the book in the chapter about speed of fast, faster, and fastest. And that China example is the middle one. That's not even the fastest one we've done. And since the book was published, I've got an even a faster one than that. So, but those build up over time, and you have to create a culture. But yeah, higher education is horrible at being responsive to opportunities because they have so much structure built in because they don't trust each other. And when you build a high level of trust and a high level of communication, that's what's foundational to making this work. But the foundational kind of tradition of higher ed, it runs really hard against this, and that's why they've all got plans for whatever their university is 2030. I'm always interested. Nobody's ever got a plan for 2029 or 2031. It's always 2030 or 2035. Right. And that's fine, but that's marketing. That's not planning. That's marketing, and that's okay.
In your book, you write about celebrating failure. That's the quote. And so some of these opportunities have come. You've taken them on, and they haven't gone real well. Why is celebrating failure so important?
Celebrating failure is critical because if you don't celebrate failure, people feel like they're a failure. No, they're a success for having tried. And if we don't try some things, we never grow and expand. If we only do what we know we can do, we're not finding God's best. And when we can get out into things that are beyond what we can control, then we can see where God's working and he gets all the credit. And if it doesn't work, I always feel like he's preparing us for something else. And I've seen that over and over and over again, where something we did failed and it prepared us for something else. And so this is a process. It's not an individual evaluation of each item, whether or not we're successful.
Roger, can you give us a personal example of a failure at Belhaven?
Well, failure's interesting because so often in the Christian world, we're really bad at stuff because we say God called us to it. And then when it fails, well, what, God didn't do it right? I've had academic programs. I had a wonderful idea we thought was open door for a master's of ministry leadership. And we were going to do this thing, and we built the whole curriculum. We built a partnership with another group, and we put it out there, and nobody wanted to sign up. Absolutely nobody. And so we had to get the first group started. So I called my friends at Lausanne. I said, if you got 15 people we could give this to for free to get them in the first group. They signed up in the first group. Nobody signed up after that. And that was a few years ago. But, I got an email last week from one of those graduates who was holding up that diploma in Africa. And he was so proud of that. Said this has transformed his life. And I thought, well, maybe we just did it for him. And that's okay.
Wow.
So, but not really a failure.
You have a great quote in the book, which I want you to unpack. Too many leaders, quote, live like long-tailed cat in a rocking chair factory. Okay, that sounds like a Southernism to me. What is that? What do you mean by it?
Southernism. I mean, I'm in Mississippi. We got to tell stories and have.
Okay. Explain that one.
Yeah. Well, a long-tailed cat in a rocking chair factory has had its tail smashed too many times because he didn't see the rocking chairs moving. And so I think we can live like that as leaders. We're so anxious about the future. We've been hurt so many times. We're fearful it's going to come again. So we're trying to anticipate the cost benefit of every little move. I mean, if that cat moves, 2 feet, what are the new things that can hit them? So they evaluate very carefully where they can move. I think we become protective rather than productive as leaders. And that's where the fear is. And we can so be overwhelmed for fear that we're going to have a failure, for fear the plan doesn't work, for fear that we can't accomplish what's in those 5 points of the document for 2030. And we get so fearful, we never become productive. We're just trying to protect ourselves and protect those around us to try to make it through. And it's kind of a shame when God could do so much more for it if we just let go and let him do it.
Well, I must confess, when I read the quote, I laughed out loud. I'm reading a book, and I thought that was really good. Hey, well, we're about out of time, Roger. Any concluding thoughts? How do you want to wrap it up? What if you're talking to the audience, what are the final things you want to say?
Well, I just come back to the scripture in Isaiah. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are my ways your ways. And I think so often we think our best ideas are God's ideas, and God does use that and puts that in our spirit. But I think when we can trust him for more than that and really let go of our control, and then he not only takes us to a higher level, but he gets all the praise and glory because it's not anything we can do on our own. I find it a wonderful way to lead. Yes, it is very dramatic compared to what most people do. But I think when you can embrace it and at least live part of it, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. It's remarkable what God can do in it. And it's just fun every single day to see what God has next.
Well, Roger, this has been fun and a joy for me. And I hope your book sells 1 million copies and it endows some kind of something at your university.
Well, that's where all the money's going, is for that. So I hope it does too. But if it helps somebody, I'm thankful.
All right. Well, God bless and thank you so much.
Thank you.